Dear listeners and viewers, this brief presentation summarizes the outcomes of the CREATE2 Erasmus Plus project. This project brings together 8 partner organizations from 7 European countries to look at how adult education policies and programs are evaluated and valorized. This presentation will look at the rationale for the project, the outcomes from the project, and its potential impact on adult education across Europe. The rationale for the project is based on the experience of a number of previous projects and on review of many adult education programs across Europe. The project rationale is that evaluation and valorization of adult education policies is crucial in creating viable strategies with long-term benefits for adult learners, their societies, and their economies. Previous research work has identified that many local and regional adult education policies are not systematically evaluated. And previous work has also identified that one of the reasons for the lack of systematic evaluation is the lack of appropriate tools available to policymakers for this task. A previous project, a CREATE1 project, 2017-2019, built on the notion of competitive regions and employability for adults through adult education, identified this lack of policy tools and resources to evaluate the impact of adult education interventions, policies, and initiatives across Europe. And this project identified that this need was particularly acute in countries and regions that were seeking to progress towards the 15% adult education participation target, which is set as a pan-European target. So the CREATE2 project builds on this previous work. As noted earlier, it brings together 8 EU partner organisations working in the field of adult education. All these organisations are active at policy and implementation levels. And the tasks of the CREATE2 project were, firstly, to map the current policy landscapes in adult education in each respective country. How is evaluation done? How is assessment done? How is monitoring done? And secondly, to respond to the findings by developing a toolbox of tools for evaluation and valorization, and to draft a green paper that would inform policy development in this area. The first task was mapping of adult education policies. If you click on the mapping symbol, it will bring you directly to the mapping report and you will be able to download it. This report summarizes adult education policies, their impact, their validation, and their evaluation in each of the countries who participated in the CREATE2 project. You're invited to read this report, which is relatively short. The research for the mapping report gathered research using primary and secondary means. 27 adult education stakeholders were interviewed across the countries. There was also a stakeholder survey, and the outcome was to map and identify the various initiatives to evaluate adult education policies. This included their methods, the tools, and the resources used. The project mapping report identified that across the EU, adult education evaluation lacks a centralized systematic evaluation framework. And where those frameworks are evident, they are highly fragmented. The report also identifies a lack of common definition and standard procedures for adult education policy evaluations. The mapping report also identified that current evaluation policy is quantitatively focused. It looks at the figures and data rather than taking a more qualitative approach. The mapping reports also identifies that evaluation is focused on learning outcomes, specific learning outcomes for learners. The report identified that there is gaps in terms of the target groups and their statistical data, a gap in private and non-formal evaluation provision, and a gap in various transparent and systematic evaluation approaches. After the mapping report, the project went on to identify various tools that help in evaluation of adult education policies. So, in consultation with stakeholders in each country, a database of tools was put together. These tools were categorized under 6 headings, and the following slides will look at each in turn. The first heading is the area of consistency of the objectives and outcomes of the adult education policy. The project has a database of tools, and if you click on the link in this slide, it will bring you directly to the tools, or you can go to the website and follow through to the Tools tab. So under Consistency of Objectives and Outcomes, the tool identified to help policymakers is a checklist that to assess the consistency of the objectives and outcomes of adult education training with the overall strategies and agendas adopted by the European Union. The second area of tools identified is in the area of program creation at policy and administration level. 3 tools are presented that were identified by stakeholders. Again, on this slide, you will see direct links to each of the tools. And as noted before, you can access them through the Tools tab on the site. There is a checklist for providers. There's a policymaking matrix evaluation of creativity tool. And there is guideline questions for focus groups and surveys provided by providers and public administration staff. The third section of the toolbox is inclusivity of adult education policies and the availability of adult education programs. And in this section, partners suggested 2 tools for inclusion. One is a checklist to assess the inclusivity of adult education policies and a checklist to assess the availability of adult education programs, particularly in geographically excluded areas. The second tool is dimensions of diversity in adult learning situations. The fourth section of the toolbox is adult education training and program delivery. One tool was proposed in this section of the toolbox, which is a template for an individual interview with participants on methods, equipment, and personnel in adult education and how they can adjust to the target group needs. The fifth area looks at value added stemming from participation in adult education. 2 tools were recommended here. One, looking at measuring the wider benefits of adult learning. So it's a focus group template with guidelines for learners and training providers. The second tool is a tool for measuring the value added that stems from the participation in adult education. The sixth category in this toolbox, it is also the final category, is continuity of program evaluation and use of its results to improve adult education policies. 3 tools were recommended in this area. Valorization and follow-up to evaluation. What are the various success factors? Looking at the success factors through a case study, and tips for policymakers seeking stakeholder engagement. The outcome from the mapping and the debate and discussion among project partners is 42 tools in the toolbox, linked to various phases of the policy cycle, 4 best practice recommendations, 5 networks and forums, 4 platforms for policymakers, and a collection of policy documents and strategies. The best way to access these is to go to the website, to the Toolbox tab, and you will be able to search under a range of headings. The third outcome for the project is policy recommendations, a green policy paper making recommendations on more systematic evaluation of adult education programs and their valorization. This policy paper, in draft form, will help to advance debate and stimulate discussion on adult education policy, looking at how it is formulated, implemented, and itself how it is evaluated. The policy paper also addresses specific training needs and provision for policymakers. It addresses support to policymaking groups and networks, and a step-by-step procedure for use and the implementation of the policy evaluation tools referred to earlier. The policy recommendations covered in the Green Paper also suggest facilitating the upscaling of the CREATE2EVALUATE project results to a number of different platforms, the importance of igniting a policy dialogue in this area of adult education because of the gaps identified, and to stimulate an exchange of how to advance the discourse on systematic policy evaluation in adult education. Overall, the project suggests that a further piece of work is to build a policy-making community. This would enhance socioeconomic development and integration by bringing together policymakers in a number of networks to share and discuss their insights, understandings, and challenges. And secondly, to holistically target a range of local, regional, national, and EU policymakers to sensitize them to the importance of policy formation and evaluation that robustly looks at adult education and its contribution to the overall community. This concludes the summary of the outcomes of the CREATE2 project. We hope it has been of value to you, and the project will appreciate any feedback that you wish to give. Thank you.